Hi everybody, This is Karen Fabian. I am the founder of Bare Bones Yoga, and this is actually my first time doing a YouTube Live. I've been recording quite a few Facebook Live videos. I know that's an alternate platform. For my anatomy work group, but I thought, why not do some live video here on my YouTube channel? So I want to welcome you. I am the founder of Bare Bones Yoga, and as a yoga teacher and teacher educator, I love to provide information really specifically on anatomy. I'm just going to adjust the camera here. So what I'm going to talk about today is this idea of creating hip sequences or sequences for your yoga classes that are themed around hip anatomy. And this can be a really popular theme for yoga teachers and certainly for students too, because the movement of the hip is so central to the movement of the body and certainly the movements that we take in yoga poses. So let's just first start out with a couple of quick pieces from anatomy, just to be sure we're all on the same page. So we've got the skeleton here, and the hip is a ball and socket joint, and it moves in lots of different ways. The leg bone, the femur, can lift up closer to the head, and this is hip flexion. The femur can move back behind the body, and that's hip extension. Because of the ball and socket arrangement, the hip can turn out, which is external rotation, or turn in, which is internal rotation. And it can then move away from the body. The thigh bone can move away from the middle of the body, which is abduction, or move closer to the midline, which is adduction. And so in a lot of poses, we have an opportunity to move in lots of different ways. Now, many times people like to focus on different movements, let's say turning the hip out, and that's a really common movement in a yoga pose. So let's say you are in a standing squat, or that would be bilateral, both hips would be open, or let's say you were in a warrior two pose, the front hip with the bent knee would be the open hip. And the muscles, let's talk a little bit about the muscles here. When we turn the hip out or externally rotate the hip, one of the big muscles that's involved in doing that is the piriformis. And that is a really big, it's not super big, but it's a fairly large muscle on the back of the body here. And it is primarily responsible for that external rotation or turning the hip out. Then we've got the gluteus medius, which is part of the 3-pack of glutes that we have on the side of the pelvis here, and that's responsible for turning the hip in, that internal rotation. And then we've got the big gluteal muscle on the back of the pelvis itself, and that is the gluteus maximus, and that's responsible for hip extension. And then we've got a muscle that runs from the lumbar spine through the front of the pelvis and connects on the thigh bone, and that's the psoas, and that's one of the muscles responsible for flexion of the hip. So if I pull this thigh bone up, that's hip flexion. And so now that we have a bit of an understanding of the movements of the hip and some of the muscles involved, let's talk a little bit about sequencing. So when we take students through a yoga sequence, it can be really helpful to kind of chunk things out so that we're not trying to have them move in lots of different ways all on one leg. This can be confusing, and it can actually be pretty tiring. So think about, as you have your students in something like Warrior One. So they've got their arms up to the sky, they have the one leg forward, they're bending that front knee. And then if you move them from Warrior One into Warrior Two, now the hips are open. So you've taken them from a closed position to an open position. And so that in and of itself might not be too confusing. But then if you add other things on, like tipping them down, putting their hand on the ground, coming into half moon, and then maybe you take them back to Warrior Two, maybe you have them reverse the warrior. So you can see how this can get to be confusing, and it can get to be tiring, especially if you do something like this in balancing postures. So if you have someone maybe in airplane pose or Warrior Three, and then you take them into dancers, and you might add something else on, and then you switch to the other side. So something to keep in mind for safe sequencing and for sequencing that will really help your students build strength in the body is to think about, as I said before, chunking things out. So you might take them in to a Warrior One type sequence where you're doing hips facing forward, Warrior One type poses. You could do some variations, maybe the hands interlaced behind the back. And then moving into a sequence where you have them in Warrior Two shapes. So Warrior Two, half moon, reverse warrior, things like that, triangle pose, rather than mixing those things up. Crescent lunge is another position similar to warrior where the hips are facing forward. So this can be another good one to tag on if you want to move people from maybe warrior one into crescent lunge. So I realize I'm not doing the poses here, so if it's a little confusing, I apologize for that. But it's really just to kind of give you this overall approach, which is to really think about moving in these different planes in one sequence on one side, and how that can sometimes be a lot for people to digest. The other thing to look for as a teacher is instability in the pelvis. So you can see here, as a person is standing up tall, the pelvis is low. But when we stand on one leg, it's common to see the pelvis shift, and it might drop on one side a lot more than it's being level. And so if you start to see people with that pelvic tilt, and I don't mean forward or back, I mean side to side, it can be an indication that they're getting tired, that they don't have the requisite strength on the standing leg in order to keep the pelvis neutral. And this can be a sign to you as the teacher that maybe you're offering them too much and you need to cut back on what's happening in your sequencing. So I hope this has been helpful. I want to wrap up by just giving you a couple of things that you can do. So on my homepage, which is barebonesyoga.com, there is a free template you can download, which is a sequence builder. And it's really easy to download and then use this template to help you create sequencing. So all you need to do is go to the website, barebonesyoga.com. You can download that sequence builder right on the homepage. It's right at the top. The next thing I want to tell you is that if you're a yoga teacher and you're looking for ways to build sequences as well, you can get my anatomy manual, which is a 200-page manual that breaks down all the poses, talks about the anatomy involved in each one, gives you cues for each one. It's wrapped up in this 200-page manual booklet here, or manual, where you're going to also see chapters on the fundamentals of anatomy, as well as supplemental chapters on things like modifications you can offer your students, red flags to look for as a teacher. So it's really a soup to nuts guide. So this you can pick up on my website. And my website, again, is barebonesyoga.com, and that's also where you can get the sequence building template. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Again, this is my first YouTube Live. I have a lot of pre-recorded videos on my channel, but I hope to do more of these as well. The other last thing I want to tell you is if you live in or near Boston, where I am, or you can get here relatively easily, please join me in January for my Urban Wellness Weekend, which is a live wellness event. And it's a 2-day event that includes yoga, meditation, healthy food, expert speakers on various aspects of health and wellness, a speaker panel sharing inspiring stories from their careers and their lives, music. It's really a whole experience put together to get you ready to head into next year with a lot of really helpful information, so that this is the year that you can really change some habits and really bring a high level of motivation and focus to your overall health and wellness. So that event invitation is also right on my website, barebonesyoga.com. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Namaste.